Grand Prix system or against Sicilian, or what they call sometimes people call it the close Sicilian, but it's not the correct name for it. It's a kind of variety of Grand Prix when we play e4, c5, knight c3. When you play this opening, you don't necessarily expect to get solid advantage in the opening, but what you do have to expect, and you should get, if you do everything correctly, you should get very comfortable position when you know what your plan is and you know what you're going to do in the middle game. At the same time, if your opponent makes some mistakes, positional or tactical, he is very likely to get crushed right in the opening or get a bad position. So now let's look at it in the white perspective. So what we're playing here, e4, c5, knight c3. Most common move is, of course, knight c6, but of course you can also face moves like e6, d6. We're going to discuss that. Well, let's go first with the main move, knight to c6, f4, and most likely continuation g6 for black. I would say about 80% of the times you go g6. You will see g6. And of course we can expect moves like e6, d6, or possibly even a6. So we are going with the main variation of the Grand Prix. So which is knight f3, bishop g7, and now regular Grand Prix, white plays bishop c4. But what I want to do is I want to give white attacking chances, the way bishop c4 does. But I also want to have big positional ideas in this opening. So I recommend bishop b5, and now we will get facing several different continuations for black. Main move, knight d4, of course. Possible moves are d6, e6, knight f6, queen c7, or queen b6. Now, we obviously cannot analyze every move. What I'm trying to explain here is basic positional ideas, and then you will see how the same idea you using no matter which continuation black plays. Now, whether black plays queen c7 or queen b6, that won't matter. When they go d6, knight f6, or knight f6, d6, or they go e6, you see, you have to understand very well the positional ideas of this opening. Main move, knight d4. We have to look at the main move first. Castling for white. For some time years ago, I was recommending bishop d3 move more, but now I like, and I would recommend mostly to castle in this position. So white castles, and here black has number of continuations. They can go d6, no, but they can go e6. They cannot go d6, obviously. They can go e6. They can play knight takes b5, or they can go a6. Well, look at them. Let's look at them. If black goes a6, obviously we cannot play bishop a4, because then we may be losing the game after knight takes f3, queen takes f3, b5, bishop b3, c4, and our bishop is trapped. Actually, when black goes a6 or e6, it's almost the same variations. It's a slight transposition and insignificant difference. on a6 we play bishop c4. Remember, we cannot go to a4 because we may get trapped, and we don't want to go back and make bad bishop out of it. So on a6 we go bishop c4. Now if black plays b5, we go bishop to d5, attacking rook, and when rook moves we go to we're playing d3, and on e6 we're just on time maintaining our bishop outside of c2, d3, e4 pawn structure for white. Now, why I said e6 and a6 about the same? Because in this position, if black played e6 instead, we would have done d3, and on a6 now we go bishop c4 or bishop a4. Now we can go bishop a4, and after b5 bishop b3. You see, it's the exact same position with insignificant difference that black's rook does not stand on b8. So position is the same. So what do we want in this position? If black plays now knight e7, what we want is we want to take on d4. If bishop takes d4, we simply go king h1, and bishop on d4 does not really stand well because white may be playing e5 and knight e4 later. So expected capture by black will be with the pawn. And now white plays knight to e2, and we get the position after castling and queen e1. This position is good position for white. Again, I'm not going to say that black is in trouble and we have big advantage. No. I'm saying only what I just said. White has a good position. So now, on bishop b7, if white plays, we may go queen f2. Now you see, we are threatening the d4 pawn. We are attacking d4 on move like queen b6. Now we have choices. What we can do? We can go something like c3 and get a little positional advantage. c3, you see, black cannot capture because the queen is hanging on b6. So what black is going to have to do here is to play knight to c6, and then white will get some advantage by playing c takes d, or even knight takes d4. Now knight takes d4 here is very interesting move. Black takes knight takes d4, and now we have bishop to e3. And you see, next move we're gonna take that knight on d4, and we will get an advantage. This position simply bad for black. Besides, they're a pawn down. So those are the ideas. I'm going to give you the arsenal of ideas, what we can do, what our plans might be. So in this position, suppose black goes d5. Now if the black goes d5, then we can go e5. Now you see, d4 pawn is hanging on queen b6. We will go queen f2. And on knight c6, we will go c3. The same thing. Now we're trying to play knight takes d4, and on knight takes d4, bishop e3. Same pattern. You have to recognize the patterns, positional ideas, and shots. Bishop e3 is a pattern, or you can call it a shot. It's kind of shot when you give a knight and you don't take it back on the very next move. So in this position, when black plays d5 and white plays e5, black may go f6. But then we go knight takes d4, and it's not clear how black is going to get their pawn back. fe, rook takes f1, king takes f1. See, we can go knight f3 later, or bishop f4, keep protecting the e5 pawn, and we will have clearly very good position. So this is the thing that is important for you to know that, so in this position, for example, white has some advantage. Now, we can get the same pawn structure. We have all the same ideas. Suppose he did not play b5 and bishop b3 is not played. Position could be like this. So same rule and same pattern applies, same ideas. We play the same way. We cannot analyze separately what happens if bishop stays on a4 and black plays d6, or what happens if black plays b5 and after bishop d3 d6. It's the same. White has the same plan. You may go queen f2, and on moves like knight c6, now you may even try to go f5 or knight g3 preparing f5. f5 will be very, very strong positional threat, and black may have to worry about it. So we just looked one of the possible continuations after knight to d4. Here is the position, here is the key position where knight d4 and castle. We just castle. That's what happens if black plays e6 or a6. Now, the interesting continuation in knight takes b5. Then we play knight takes to b5. And if black goes d6, d3, knight f6, and we go knight c3. Now, something has to be explained in this position. When black fianchettos bishop on g7, and we have the pawn structure c2, d3, e4, f4, and we have exchanged our light square bishop for black's knight, those pieces are exchanged, then our pattern, our plan in this position will be queen e1, castle, and queen h4. Now remember this position, and then we're going to go with f5 and bishop h6. This is the position that will be analyzed carefully in if black played little differently in the opening. Now, if black played differently, you see the similarity. Now I want to go back to the start position, and I'm going to show you clear similarity with if game continued differently. Knight f3, knight c3, knight c6, bishop b5, d6, f4, g6, knight f3, bishop g7. It could have been, of course, white plays different move order. d3, knight f6, castle, bishop d7, we take the knight, black takes, queen e1, castle, and queen h4. Now you see the same, it's completely different move order and different aspect, different move third, fourth, and fifth. But the base does not change. White plays exactly the same plan that we just looked applies here. What is the difference here? Bishop that stands on c6 in a previous example was on c8. But that does not mean anything. It's exactly same plan. White continues with the same idea. What happened here? Missing white's light square bishop and black's queen side knight. White's still gonna play f5, queen h4, bishop h6, all the same ideas. Now let's go back to our move order and how we got to this position. And that particular attack, how we continue attack on the king's side, we will look in the other continuation. We just looked at e4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, f4, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop b5. You see, if black goes d6 or knight d4, there is a good possibility that two variations will merge at some point. So we looked at knight takes b5, white captures back, knight takes b5, black plays d6, and we castle. Black plays knight f6, knight c3, castle, d3. This is one set position. We have clear plan, queen e1, queen to h4, f5, bishop h6. And this type of attack we will discuss in a later stage. Now, what are other possibilities after knight d4 move when white castles? There is one very popular way to play this position for black. And very popular play is knight takes b5, knight takes b5, and d5. Now this is very, very controversial move, and white has to make here very important decisions. White has two moves. One is e5 and one is e takes d. I'm not going to take responsibility to judge which one is the better continuation. e5 move was widely analyzed and played by English grandmasters and English masters, English players, and they have had some relatively good results with white by playing e5. Well, you can always look at those games with e5 and you can find that white has done reasonably well. The variation we're going to analyze now is e takes d. It's a lot sharper and it's a more interesting continuation. Obviously black cannot play queen takes d5 because knight c7 fork. So black does not want to play knight f6, and here is why. Actually it was played a few times, knight f6, but it's not recommended for black to play knight f6 because white simply will go c4 and black is not going to get the pawn back on d5. For instance, castle d4, and after a6 knight c3, and after c takes d, queen takes d4. That's a very strong move, and black does not have any compensation for sacrificed pawn, because on any kind of move like knight g4 or knight h5, white is going to have simply knight e5, and they have just an extra pawn in the center without any compensation. So this is not a good way to play for black. So what is the common move in this position? a6, knight on g8, knight c3, and now knight f6. Now black wants to comfortably take the pawn on d5, and then if that happens, they will have better position because they will have good control in the center and two bishops. Well, white is going to try not to make that happen. So d4 move is absolutely forced here. And here also, black has two different ways they can play. They can simply take on d4, queen takes d4, actually three ways. C takes d is one of the continuations. Queen takes d4, and after castle, white will go knight e5, and I don't think black has compensation here either. Just as in a previous example, white has an extra pawn in the center. This is not something you should expect. So the main continuations here are c4 move. It's a relatively new move, and the other one is knight takes d5. Let's look at them in this order. c4. On a c4, we have two different ways we can play. Queen e2, attacking the c4 pawn, and if b5, protecting. Now what black wants is simply to take on d5 and they will have a good position. But then we can play knight e5, and if castling is not good because of knight c6, attacking queen followed by knight takes e7 check. So expected move after knight e5 is knight takes d5, and here we can go knight c6, and you see black is forced to play knight takes c3 because they cannot move the queen, because knight will take on d5 and black cannot take either knight because of the mate on e7 square. So black has to play knight takes c3, pawn takes c3, and maybe now queen d6. Now this position is interesting. We can go knight e5, and on castling we can go a4. Now this position is double-edged. I personally like white here because I want to play bishop a3. Well, of course black has b4 move on which we can play c takes b, queen takes d4, and bishop e3. It's a double-edged position, and again I like white here. So this is possible continuation. Again, it's matter of taste. This is the c4 move we just discussed, and those are the consequences of this move. And the other move black can choose in this position is simply play knight takes d5. Now that gives us very complex, very complicated strategical position. D takes c, and it looks really bad for white, but it's not bad because queen takes d8, king takes d8, b takes c, and now we have the position. White has extra pawn, and of course this extra pawn means absolutely nothing, since white has terrible pawn structure. But here is something we have to notice. Pawn structure is bad, but if black does not play bishop takes c3, then white will play knight to d4 and bishop e3, putting rooks on b and d file. They're going to have very dangerous initiative. But if white plays bishop takes c3, then we play rook b1. And now all black needs in this position to develop the bishop, connect rooks, and then they will have an advantage. But that's very hard to do. Now, you cannot develop the bishop because rook is going to take on b7. So first you may try to protect the pawn by playing king c7. Now we go rook from b1 to b3, attacking black's dark square bishop. Black bishop has to go to f6 and g7 with very little difference. Now the key move is bishop d2. And after bishop d2, black develops, and it looks like black is doing real well. But that's when we give the bishop a5 check. Actually, in this position, we should have done knight e5 first. Make sure the king doesn't come out. And on bishop takes c2, we can play even rook c3. And if bishop goes back, now rook d1. You see the problem of black's king is blocking rook on a8, and black cannot ever activate the a8 rook. They're going to be playing for the rest of the game with a rook down, and this is very bad. Now here, if white plays bishop b6 followed by a4 and a5, this is like a permanently out of the game, this rook. So this position is not very good. Well, but question is, can black in this position after bishop a5 check try king c6? The answer is no, because after rook b6 check, king takes d2, this position is very difficult for black. We can go knight d2, trying knight b3 check, and king is in a great danger. Not to mention that we can always capture the pawn on b7, and later we can go rook d1. So this position is very dangerous. Actually, you can look at the game between Eugene Perlstein, my student, and Greg Shahari from the US Junior Championship. White won this game in like 18 or 19 moves. So this position is very dangerous. If you have any questions about this position or any other, so feel free to contact me, and I will be happy to assist you in any way I can. So now let's go back, and we're facing position. So we just looked at the three continuations that black has in a position where white plays knight c3, and they play knight f6, and we played d4. This is the position. This is the exact position. So the three continuations are cd, after which we simply play queen takes d4, and there is no really compensation for a deficit of a pawn. The other continuation is c4, and I just said a little while ago that we're just going to go queen e2, and after b5, knight e5, and I explained that's also a very playable and interesting position for white. And the third continuation was knight takes d5, d takes c, getting to the wild position with a highly unusual pawn structure for white, being triple pawns on c file. So that's what happens if black tries to play very actively. Again, the position is this. White just castled after knight d4, and if black plays knight takes b5, knight takes b5, and now if they play d5. Now, what happens if black plays d6, we go d3, and then they go e6. And now they try to play knight e7. Well, the two things may happen. First of all, e6 right away may be really bad because of e5, and on d, fe, it's big problem with the knight d6 check. So if black wanted to play e6 in this position, they have to play a6. First, knight c3, and now e6. Now remember, there is a rule, which I don't know exceptions to the rule. Well, when g6 and e6 played, it's very good for white. The problem with playing g6 and e6 is a d4 move. Okay, we want to play d4, exchange those pawns, and put maximum pressure to black's d pawn. But we want to play d4, and after cd, take this pawn with the bishop. But pieces don't move like this, so I would recommend here bishop to e3. Okay, and again, so the move, what we were talking about, knight takes b5, d6, we went d3, a6, knight c3, e6. So I do go bishop to e3. Now, after planned knight e7, we go d4. Now, what's black to do here? Black can go b6 or c takes d. In both variations, white has clear advantage. After b6, I would say we can simply take dc, and on dc we can even exchange queens and creates serious problem here. Rook fd1 check, and on king c7 maybe a4, trying to go a5. This is a serious problem for black, and if they took with the other pawn bc, then we can go queen d2 and rook d1, immediately targeting the d6 pawn. So in the position after d4, the only other choice black has is to play c takes d, bishop takes d4, and the castle. And now they have also very, very bad position. We've just placed bishop takes g7, king takes g7. We double on d file by playing queen d4 check, king g8, and rook d1. You see the d pawn cannot be protected. Now if black plays d5, this, like, we have a big variety of nice. First of all, we can simply take the pawn and win a pawn, but the move I like even better is e5 with the positional threat of knight e4. You see, black cannot capture because white will take the queen, and then knight f6, and also queen f2, knight d4, and trying to play on a king side. This is really bad, maybe lost position for black. So that's what happens if black tries to play e6 and g6. So this is based on this analysis that we just looked, I can say that we practically covered the knight d4 move. On e4 c5, knight c3, knight c6, f4 g6, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop b5, and knight to d4. This move we practically covered, and there is not much to it. Now let's go to some other continuations. e6 is the first thing we have to look. We will look at after knight d4. e6 on fifth move for black. Looks like normal developing move. Black is trying to play knight e7, and they will have a nice regular Sicilian position. But this e6 move is nearly winning, nearly losing for black. White nearly wins by force. And in the hands of a good positional player, it's sure death. So bishop takes c6, and now regardless which way black recaptures, they're gonna have severe problems with the pawn structure. Now let's see how. First, let's look at b takes c. White goes d3, and let's see why is this double pawn so bad. We know that double pawn that is part of the chain, it's not really a problem. But the problem is not the double pawn. Problem is that black has c8 bishop that can never be activated if white does good job. Now, after b takes c, we just went d3. Suppose black goes knight e7 and white goes castle. Now black has to push either d6 or d5, and we deal with it. If black goes bishop a6, we will make sure that we play bishop e3 and on c4 d4, leaving bishop on a6 in very bad shape. Now let's look at some continuations like d6 or d5. On d5 we will go a5. So we want to make sure we don't want any contact in the center, and after castling we go knight to a4. Now you see, to win this game, white needs to play one more move, c4 followed by b3, and then c5 pawn is totally dead. White can pick it up by playing bishop a3, bishop takes c5, and it's absolute positional disaster. So when in this position again, we just looked. I want to go once more slowly. So black plays e6. We play bishop takes c6, bc and d3, and after knight e7 we castle. Now when we castle, black has two moves, d6 or d5. So we just looked at d5, we play e5, and we want to make sure that light square bishop of white never activated. So if black tries bishop a6, what should we do? We should go knight a4 or maybe rook e1 first. Why rook e1? Because if we go knight a4 and they play c4, we want to go d4 without black having chance to play c3 and opening the bishop by attacking our rook. So I may want to play rook e1 first. Anytime pawn goes to c4, we will play d4. So that's not going to work. So now if black castles, then we go knight a4, attacking, or maybe even b3, attacking c5 pawn. On c4, we will still play d4, putting the knight on c5 and having terribly positioned bishop on a6. Now let's look what else can be done. Now otherwise, if black does not play bishop a6, but they simply castle knight a4, even doesn't matter whether black is castled already or not. And on queen a5, c4 very strong, and if castled, then b3. See, this position is totally lost because bishop will never see light of day, and next move we will go queen e1, trying to exchange the queens, and then we will take the c5 pawn. But c5 pawn we want to take with the bishop by playing bishop a3 and bishop takes c5. This is a positional disaster. So black cannot play like this. So suppose now black does not go d5 at all. So they went d6, which is, as I mentioned already, very bad move. We play bishop takes c6, b takes c. We go d3, knight e7, castle, and they go d6, so they go castle. Doesn't matter. On castle or d6. As soon as white finished development and they castled, their next move is going to be e5. Now white plays e5. And black is almost lost again. For different reasons. Well, actually for the same reason that light square bishop is half dead piece. And domination on dark squares will be critical. Black is going to go knight e4 and attacking the c5 pawn, but it's not so much c5 pawn we want. We may go bishop e3, bishop f2, bishop h4. Actually, it's almost impossible to go through all the patterns white can. I can tell you the ideas. It's a domination on the dark squares. How it has to be executed. The best thing to do for you is look for the games. Look for the games. I have played, I don't know, hundreds of games where I won those positions on an internet chess club. I won it practically without putting any effort because the position played by itself. And you can play bishop e3, f2, h4, and then go with all your pieces on queen side and win. or you can play simply by playing c4, b3, and then winning the pawn and winning in the center. Well, it's all because of the dead bishop on c8. Now let's look what will happen if black plays e6 anyway, but captures white's bishop with the d pawn. Now that's not much difference as far as the plan goes. Only difference here is that we will never have a chance to win the c pawn, because black can always protect with b6. But then we go d3, knight e7, castle, and black castles, and now we go e5. Now after e5, most of the ideas still remain there. The ideas are knight e4, blockading and targeting f6 and d6 square, bishop e3, bishop f2, bishop h4, and those black still has dead bishop on c8, and their king side, it will be assaulted real quickly. Well, we can play b3, bishop b2, supporting knights on f6, and then the other knight on g5, transferring rook or the queen on queen side. Overwhelming attack. This is overwhelming advantage. There is no way black can neutralize white's attack. So conclusion we came to here, that after bishop b5, e6 is a real bad move. Now let's look at d6 move. What will happen on d6? On d6, we just castle, or we go d3, it doesn't matter, because it's all transposition. Now, when white plays knight f6, remember, as soon as they go e6, we immediately take and go d3 and e5. We transpose to the other continuation. But we don't want to take voluntarily on c6, not until black plays e6. Now, if black goes knight f6, we go queen e1, we want to transfer queen to h4, and now after black castles, and as soon as black castles, we have to eliminate the bishop, eliminate the knight on c6. We don't want this knight to jump to d4, attack the pawn on c2, or we don't want to be forced to take and go knight e2, because bishop on b5 doing nothing. Our pawn on c2 is weak, so we don't want this to happen. So as soon as black castled, we want to eliminate the c6 knight, b takes c, and queen h4, trying to attack on a king side. Now about this attack that I previously mentioned, how it will be developed. This is very powerful attack. Rook b8, for example, f5. Now let's look at it. What happens if white simply takes on f5? Actually, it's not going to be any different if white doesn't take on f5. We go bishop h6. It's a very strong move. And now whatever black does, maybe rook takes b2. Knight to g5. Now this is already very, very strong for white. The best way to do it, I'm just showing you the pattern we're going to attack with. f5 and rook b8. In this position, before you go f5, you see there is no counterplay for black. This is our main plan. What we want to do, we may invest one tempo for white, like rook b1, and then we stop all black's counterplay, and next we want to go f5 and bishop h6. We don't want rook to come in on b2 in one move, and we want him to try real hard to get any attack on the queen side. Suppose they go bishop a6, we go f5. Anytime they go c4, we will go d4. Remember, the rule we are following to: minimum contact on the queen side, maximum contact on the king side. So, and if black goes something, I don't know what can black do. The pattern is bishop h6 and knight g5. This is very powerful if black goes something like queen a5, bishop h6, just to tell you what may happen here. On c4 we're going to go d4, and this is already unstoppable attack, followed by knight g5, and later on this is like unstoppable combination, fg. And this happened personally in my games. It happened, I don't know, maybe like few hundred times, and everyone who plays it, I'm sure, my students or whoever bought my tapes on it, so they have won like hundreds of games with the same combination. Rook takes f6, and now rook cannot take because there is mate in two moves. And if king takes, then we have this rook f1 check, forcing king back, and then queen takes h7 mate. So this is like a thematic combinations. It goes over and over and over, and it's very, very difficult for black to face. Now let's look some different variety of this attack. Suppose at some point black realizes that they may get in some trouble and play differently. Okay, here is what we're going to do. The possible continuation: e4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, f4, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop b5, d6. We go d3 or castle, doesn't matter. And now bishop d7. Now, this move was endorsed by Garry Kasparov, but it's not necessarily a very good move. And castle, black will go a6, bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6. And now we go queen e1, and black goes queen d7. Also, or maybe knight f6. Now, let's look at this. This is actually a very interesting position. What happens after knight f6? Now we're going to see a little variety of this attack. We go queen h4. It's this, just like we're supposed to do. After castling, we go f5, just like we're supposed to play, and e6. That's the time when we shouldn't play bishop h6. This position is bad for black, really bad, but not after bishop h6, because here black has moved like this. They can go knight h5, they can maybe go take and knight to g4, or finally they may go move like knight d7, and it's very difficult to get an advantage for white here. However, bishop g5 is extremely strong. E takes f, and now it's white's move. White can simply play rook a to e1. I would say black is lost here. Why is black lost? They can never play f takes e. You see, this pin is deadly. F takes c loses to knight d2, and we're now attacking knight on f6 3 times, and we win a piece. Several times my opponents on high level, they try to play h6, which is also bad. Bishop takes h6, bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, and knight g4. But now after queen f4, they're facing more difficult problems that have no solutions. You see, if f takes e, which must be played, because otherwise white wants to play e takes f. F takes e, we obviously don't take the knight because black is going to capture on f3. And f takes e, we simply play d takes e. And now the knight is hanging on g4. If knight goes on f6, then after rook d1, black is in a lot of trouble. After knight g5, black is in a lot of trouble with the idea of queen h4. Well, altogether, black is in a lot of trouble. This is lost position for black. So, those ideas, as I mentioned also, that it's impossible to go through all these possible all these continuations what black can play. You have to remember, there are ways when we play for a pawn structure, there are ways when we play for direct attack on a king. Now let's look at the continuation and idea and ideas behind Kasparov's bishop d7 move. Bishop b5, d6, d3, bishop d7, castling a6, bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6. This happened in Kasparov's game against Ljubojevic, Yugoslavian grandmaster. Queen e1, queen d7, and here what black wants to do. Black wants to castle queenside. Now, we have to know one thing here. We do not play queen h4 and f5 unless we are 100% sure that that's where black is castling. Now, what we do, we're making waiting move, bishop d2, and black makes knight f6, suppose, also waiting move. We play rook to b1, waiting move. And here black castles in a lot of games queenside, and we're going to see what happens. Now, if black has castled kingside, I would go h3 first, and then I go queen h4 and f5. I'm not in a hurry to play queen h4 right away, because there is not much of a counterplay for black on a queen side. The reason why I play h3, because after queen h4 I want to avoid queen g4, and I definitely don't want to exchange queens. So that's why I would play h3, followed by queen h4 and f5 with a standard attack. Now what happens if black castles queenside? Then b4. You see that the rook b1 move paid off. b4, c takes b, rook takes b4. Well, I don't know how can I put mildly here, but black is lost. Even if you put it very mildly, black is still lost. What we want to do, queen f2, you see the diagonal, we want to jump with the queen on a7, and then rook b1, and then bishop e3, and knight d4 coming too. Every one of white's pieces will be all over the black's king. There is no possible defense for black in this position. After b4, black is absolutely and unconditionally lost. So now we will go back and look what happens. We will look what happens if black does not allow Grand Prix. Remember, that's easy to do for black, not to allow this variation. For instance, they can go knight c6, and after f4, d6, and after knight f3, e6. But now or even they can go a6. Now we cannot go bishop b5, then what do? Now this is not Grand Prix anymore. So that's what you have to do here. You have a choice of a couple of continuations. Actually, it could have been done like this. You can go to d4, and switch to regular Sicilian if you are comfortable with the position after f4 and a6, and because now black cannot play Paulsen system, they cannot play Najdorf variation. This is one way to play. Secondly, and one I play is g3, knight f6, d3, and now simply going after g6 we go bishop g2, bishop g7, we castle, black castles. Now this is very common closed Sicilian position, regular closed Sicilian, with wasted move a6. Black does play b5, but not with a6, rook b8 and b5 and a5. This is like having closed Sicilian opening with a6 wasted move for black. And then what you play here, just like everybody played the closed Sicilian, h3, g4, then knight e2, knight g3, and push your pawns and attack on the king side. That's black's priority, black's actually it's black's choice not to allow Grand Prix attack the way we played. There is another way to play for black where they can avoid Grand Prix attack. It's e4, c5, knight c3. They can go e6, and after f4, a6. Well, here is my answer to this. First of all, on e4, c5, knight c3, e6, I would seriously consider g3 move. And after knight c6, knight e2. Now, why is this? After g3, we're playing g3 and we know we don't want black to let black to go g6. Now, if black goes d5 here, then you can pick up from any opening book the continuations we have here, ed, ed, and bishop g5. This is very well theoretical position, very comfortable for white, or even go d3 in this position. This is something we are not going to go over with now, but through this now. But g3 is one continuation, and on knight c6, the reason why I'm saying I want to go knight e2, make sure black does not play g6 and bishop g7. The reason why I'm playing knight e2 first, because before I put the bishop on g2, is because if they go g6, then I go d4. That's always bad for black. It's bad for black to play g6, e6, if d4 is possible. Now c takes d4, knight takes d4, and now black also has to play a6, because after bishop g7, knight to b5 is very, very strong. So this is not good for black. So white will, if white goes on e6, I would recommend g3, but also you can go f4. Now on knight c6, knight f3, and suppose now black goes a6. But again, you want to go d4 and play Paulsen variation regular, you have you can do that. Or you can go d3, and after knight f6, g3, and on d5 go e5, knight d7, bishop g2. Normal position for white when they're gonna castle and slowly prepare king side play. Again, of course, this position alone we can analyze for half an hour more, but we don't have this luxury. So what you can do, you can go ahead and look for the games played with this variation, or I really mean it, you can contact me and I can help you find the games and answer any questions you might have. So, and again, so now let's look at continuation. After e4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, f4, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop b5. If black plays queen b6, we can simply take on c6. We were going to take this knight anyway. Now queen takes, we can go d3, or we can just castle first. D3 is fine. d6, castle, knight f6. You see, the character of the position remains exactly the same. We have the same plan, queen e1, queen h4. There is nothing can happen. You will never get the position exactly same positions over and over. And if there is some little changes like this, you see, why is this to be considered as different position? It's not. Light square, bishop is missing for white, black's knight is missing, white has same pawn structure, and if black castles, we have to go on and continue with exact same attacking plan, queen e1, queen h4. So you have to be able to apply these ideas to in all possible variations. So you played correctly. Don't forget to contact me if you have any problems with this opening, and playing it correctly will always guarantee you comfortable position.